To look at how can we plot the demand for domestic goods and the trade balance in our open economy. So let's first plot the demand for domestic goods, right? So here we know, okay, demand for domestic goods. Let's just quickly remember what that was. So, demand for domestic goods. Right, so we simply want to plot z is equal to c plus I plus g. This is what we plotted in a closed economy. Now we have to add net exports, right, to it. So we want to plot this. So this is z is equal to c plus I plus g plus nx, and then we know to just start. Okay, sorry, this is vertical x and z, this is y, this is nx, and this is y. Right, and then we know, okay, we have to then plot the 45-degree line in order to pin down the equilibrium output, right? So this is the 45-degree line. So we know, okay, equilibrium output in the goods market is given at point A at the intersection of the 45-degree line and where you're and the demand schedule. Right. So over here now in the lower panel, we want to plot our trade balance in the y and x space. And we're assuming that at the equilibrium point, the trade balance is zero. So this is the equilibrium point, right? So we're assuming at this equilibrium point, the trade balance is zero. In general, at the equilibrium point, the trade balance could be, the trade balance could be, you could have a deficit, you could have a surplus as well, right? This is just an assumption that we're making. And we know it's going to pass through this point of trade balance, right? At the point where y is equal to ya, we know that when y is equal to ya, nx has to be 0, and this is only by assumption, right? So this is ya. Right, so if we make this, right, so this is going to be something like this. So this is nx, right? We've plotted it here. Right, so basically what you're saying is when y is equal to ya, and x is 0 by assumption, right? So what you said is when y is equal to ya, goods market equilibrium. So goods market is in equilibrium, and x is 0 by assumption. Again, this is only by assumption. This is not like always true. It is just by assumption. Let's just highlight this by assumption. And this is the assumption, sorry, this is the assumption over here, right? Based on which we have made this point, based on this assumption. Right, so now moving forward. Okay, so this is where nx is 0. Right, now if we look at it, if we go over here to the left of ya, then here nx is less than 0. Right, so to the left of it, sorry, nx is greater than 0. We have a trade surplus. To the right of it, nx is less than 0. We have a trade deficit. Now we want to look at in more detail the properties of nx. Let's discuss in detail the way we've plotted it and the economic intuition behind these properties. Number one, we can see it's downward sloping. In our y and x space. Now, why is that? Let's try to understand why is it downward sloping. Because we know when y increases, we know imports increase, right? Because we know imports are made up of, because imports are a positive functional domestic income. And x do not change because exports depend upon real exchange rate and foreign income. So as a result of this, net exports, which are x minus imports by epsilon, when this increases, this goes down, right? So net exports go down. So it's downward sloping because when y increases, imports go up, which causes net exports to go down. The second property is that okay, we are assuming y is equal to ya from the top panel, right? So we're assuming that in goods market equilibrium, which is this point, y is equal to y in the top panel, where our demand schedule and 45-degree line intersect. nx is equal to 0. So this is an assumption, right? Again, the idea is that we're assuming this, right? So just keep in mind, this is not a necessity. We are just, we are just assuming, right, that at goods market equilibrium, nx is 0. In general, in goods market equilibrium, the home country may have a trade balance, trade surplus, or trade deficit. The home country. So let me just clear all. Or not. May have. Let's just write it. The home country may have a trade balance, trade deficit, or trade surplus. Right, so in general, in the goods market equilibrium, you can have a trade deficit, a trade balance, or a trade surplus, right? So we're here just by assumption. We're plotting it in such a way that when the goods market is in equilibrium, when net exports are 0, again, this does not have to necessarily be the case. Now let's look at the last property for this. Right, so properties, right? So we were looking at this properties, and let's look at the last two and number 3. Number 3 is, let's discuss what does net exports depend on. If you recall, net exports are a function of y star, and the real exchange rate, right? From the text. Number 1, it depends upon y, right? But we just discussed, given y increases, imports go up and net exports go down, right? And however, remember, a change in y will only cause movement along nx schedule in y nx space. So in the y nx space, if y changes, then you'll just have a movement along this graph, right? Because remember, a variable on the x-axis only cause movements. Shift happens because of a change in a variable, which is in its equation, but not on the x-axis, right? Exogenously, whatever variable changes exogenously, right? So net exports does depend upon y, but y only causes movement, right? It only causes movement along the curve. Because it's on the x-axis, so we know it is only when y is going to change, we'll just have a movement along this curve. The curve is not going to shift. Right? Because shift happens because of variables that appear in the equation, but they're not on the x-axis. Those are going to cause shifts. And then we know kinetic exports also depends upon y star, where we know that when y star increases, exports increase because exports are a positive function of foreign income, and this causes net exports to increase. Now, the idea is that when now we're here, since nx increases for any given y, when y star increases, nx schedule shifts upwards. Nx schedule shifts upwards in y nx space. So what you're saying is, now when y star increases, what you can see is that, let's say, net exports are going to increase for any given y. First for this y, this was net exports, now it's this. Similarly, for this level of y, net exports is this. So what's going to happen is, you're going to have this increase, right? It's going to increase, right? Net exports are going to increase for any given y when y star increases, so the entire curve is going to shift, right? So when y changes, it's just a movement along the curve because it's a variable on the x-axis. But when y star increases, so in that case, because net exports are going to now increase for any given level of y, so the entire schedule is going to shift upwards. And let's look at the last thing it depends on. This is y star is going to cause shifts, and we know changes in real exchange rate is also going to cause shifts. So the last thing I want to look at that it depends upon is the real exchange rate epsilon, where when real exchange rate decreases, net exports are going to increase, assuming the Marshall-Lerner condition holds, right? Real exchange rate has an ambiguous effect on the net exports, but assuming Marshall-Lerner condition, assuming the Marshall-Lerner condition, it's going to real exchange rate. Real exchange rate decreases, that's going to cause net exports to increase. The keyword here is assuming the Marshall-Lerner condition. So this is only true under the Marshall-Lerner condition because otherwise there's an ambiguous effect. Why is this going to happen? Because again, since net exports increases for any given y, when real exchange rate decreases, net export schedule shifts upwards in y and x space, right? Again, the whole idea is this: when real exchange rate decreases, assuming the Marshall-Lerner condition, net exports are going to increase for any given level of y like this, so the entire schedule is going to shift upwards, right? So y only causes movement along curve, but y star and epsilon cause shifts because they're going to change net exports for any given level y, so the entire curve shifts. So we're seeing that when we plot the net export the trade balance or the net export schedule in the y and x space, then we know it's going to be downward sloping. And then we know, okay, at the goods market equilibrium, you could have either a trade balance, a trade surplus, or trade deficit. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case where you have a balanced trade. Thirdly, then we talked about what causes movements and shifts in this net export schedule. We know net export depends upon three things: y star, epsilon. Y is only going to cause movements when you plot it in the y and x space. Y star and epsilon, y star and real exchange rate are going to cause shifts because they're going to change net exports for any given level y, which is going to shift the entire schedule.